Okay, so communication myths. More words make the message clearer. That is not true. It may be more useful to stop, to listen, or to ask a question. So rather than trying to communicate with more words and more explanations and more, whatever, it's often better to say, okay, I'm either going to stop and wait, I'm just going to listen to what the other person has to say, or maybe I need to clarify something, see if I can get a little better handle on what is being communicated. Another myth, meanings are in words. Not true. Meanings are in the interpretation of word symbols. So remember, we use symbols as one of the elements of communication. So the meanings of what we communicate are in interpreting what symbols are included. So that's actually kind of a pretty big concept to wrap your brain around. So we'll discuss that a little bit more in detail later. And a lot of people would argue that information equals communications, and that is also not true. Sharing information may not result in communication. Have you ever been in a conversation where you are just really in detail and in depth discussing something, and you get to the point where you pause and you're waiting for the response and they say nothing, and you start to question whether they even interpreted anything that you said? And there's actually an official word for this. Is kind of like airing dirty laundry in my family, but my family is notorious for not really listening. They're only half listening, and the actual term for it is echoic listening. The root word is echo. And so what will happen is, I will be speaking, and my mom or my brother, I'll wait and they don't say anything, and I'll say, oh, then my head blew up, or yeah, and then the world exploded. Something completely, irrational, but it shocks them into going, I heard you, and they're able to spit back the last few words of the sentence that I said before. And it's echoic listening, where you're actually not processing, but your brain on some level can echo back the last few words that were said, even though you really did not understand the whole context of the conversation. And so I'll always say, that was nice echoic listening, and they don't really like that so much. But so it's very clear that sometimes information is not communication, because you can share information, and that does not necessarily mean that it was effectively communicated or effectively received, because remember, we send and receive simultaneously. Interpersonal relationship problems are really communication problems. Also not true. Not all conflict is the result of misunderstanding. And often we blame a lot of conflict on misunderstanding, but not always the case. Okay, so more rules. We're going to talk a lot about rules at the beginning, and then hopefully how to implement the rules as we go. On a card or paper or whatever you happen to have, please describe the most universal rule for interpersonal communication. What is the one, if someone came to this country from Mars and had no concept of communication and said, what do I need? What is the one rule I need to know to communicate on Earth? What would you say? And then, once you've processed that, describe your personal most important rule for communicating. So what is your motto or your mantra of the way that you approach communication is this? My rule is, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, or, do no harm, or the one with the most toys wins, whatever. What is your rule for communicating? And then what do you think is the rule most broken? And that's not necessarily your rule or the universal rule, just what rule is most often broken in communication. Again, those are some things that you might do as your reflection post. Then, consider changing it up a little bit. What about rules of group communication? Because so far we've been talking about dyad communication, two people. So now, how does that differ when we're looking into groups? Here are some basic rules of group communication, and there are many more, and there are ones that you might think of that would apply in your specific situation that may not apply all the time universally. But each group member is an equal partner. Each group member has something to contribute and should be encouraged to do so. leadership roles may rotate or rest on one person. So as the group forms and continues and grows and then eventually terminates, if that applies, the leadership roles can change throughout that process, or it can always be kind of the responsibility of one of those group members. And the concept of brainstorming is valuable. And it's not just for generating options. Often brainstorming is just a way to collaborate, and it's to grow and learn and develop and discover. And so we often think of brainstorming as let's come up with ideas, but brainstorming can be beneficial just to communicate, because ideas are what we communicate. So, let's talk about some ideas and learn from each other and grow from each other. Okay, so I did want to throw this in because this is very relevant to communication. Mediated reality. And, you might say, what is that? I've never heard of that term. It is life as it is depicted in the media. So as the tabloids and as magazines and as reality shows and as TV and movies and all of those things, internet, it's the concept we get of how life works based on how it is portrayed in the media. And so interesting to consider, how does that mediated reality affect our interpersonal relationships? So I'd like you to kind of consider that a little bit. How does watching reality shows or watching YouTube videos or movies, how does that affect our interactions? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but how it might affect one person is not necessarily how it would affect everyone. So based on your experience, how might that change or impact your relationships? And what are some examples of those? Something else you may choose to reflect about. So now that you know what mediated reality is, what do you think mediated interpersonal communications are? So you may process that quickly and just kind of get something in your mind you think mediated interpersonal communications are. It is communication established or maintained through media rather than face-to-face. So not media in the sense of paparazzi and news, but internet, computers, phones, texting, any type of technological communication, rather than face-to-face, sit down, look someone in the eye and communicate. So what are the differences between face-to-face and email communications? There are tons and they are significant, but how do we differentiate communicating on email versus communicating at a table, across a table from someone? There are marked differences, and I think that some of those are explicit, some of them are implicit, like we discussed, and those differences really change our communication. We're forced to change based on whether it's in one of those contexts. What about snail mail? We kind of have lost that, but I happen to be someone who still really feels strongly about writing cards to people. That's kind of one of my gifts, if you will. I like to give the gift of sending a card. And so, I'm the one that every time we go to the store, I browse the card aisle just to see what happens to be there, because I think cards, not only does it communicate something that we may not necessarily think to say, or that we might not tell someone face to face, it gives us kind of that buffer so that we can express maybe more of our feelings than we would say in person. But also, if you buy a card and take the time to write in it, even if it's just love Brenna, and the date at the top, but you take the time to write in it, and then you take the time to address it and stick it in the mail and send it off, that communicates a lot more thought and a lot more involvement and a lot more intimacy than a text or an email. And that's not to say that you can't convey those things through those mediums, but a letter or a card, think about when you go to a mailbox and you see someone has written your name on an envelope in the mailbox and you know that someone sent you something. That's exciting. I mean, we have too much junk mail in this world. Come on, we need some more letters and cards. So, snail mail can be a really special communication tool. And then on kind of the opposite end of that, chat rooms. How do we communicate differently when we're in a room with a whole bunch of people, but none of us are together? We can't see anyone. Well, I guess you can with video chats, but you're kind of at the mercy of what people tell you about themselves, and people can portray a very different persona online than they can face to face. And so, Brad Paisley, I'm so much cooler online. For those of you country fans, for those of you who aren't, check it out on YouTube. It's a cute song. You really can kind of fool a lot of people, and you can communicate a very different image and a very different life in a chat room or an email. So how does that change things? How can you truly know you're communicating? And then, which is most effective? How do we make those decisions? How can we say that if we are face-to-face, it's more effective than email? Or can we say, well, email can be more effective because X, Y, and Z? That's something that you can kind of personally work through. How is that more effective? Why do you think so? And do you think relationships can be developed by email? We live in a society where there are lots and lots of people who have met online and gotten married and live very happy lives. So one might argue, yes, you can develop a relationship by email. I think there are others that would argue you may develop a very early relationship via email, but then at some point it becomes something more than an email relationship. Most people, if they meet on email, eventually end up meeting face to face. So if the relationship exclusively remains via email, can you really truly develop that to a certain level of relationship? Or at some point, do you have to meet face to face? Those are kind of personal thoughts, and I'd be interested to hear what you all think about some of those things. And then, do you think using symbols are as good as face-to-face nonverbal cues? In other words, if you send a smiley face at the end of an email, is that as good as what you may communicate non-verbally if you were in the room with someone, as you might have said that same phrase? But, I find often, I think people, if they're conscious of the way they may be perceived, because you can't read tone and you can't read intent in email often. And so I think, there are those like happy smiley face people that, every sentence has a smiley face at the end. And I often wonder if those are people that want to make sure that their message is not interpreted incorrectly or negatively. And so, if you can't read tone and you can't see nonverbals and you can't really understand the nuances that you would in a conversation, they'll do lots of smileys so that, there's no question that they're kidding, or that, they don't want to be interpreted incorrectly. So I'm wondering what you think about that. Is that as good as face-to-face nonverbal cues, or can you get cues from words or, other things? So that's just something to consider. And I would like you to consider, you can either write these down or just, think about them. What are examples of email exchanges, friendships through email exchanges, characteristics through email exchanges? What are some of those things that you've done that, go with this? So what characteristics, friendships, etc. And then how about negative messages? Do you want to get a negative message via email or via letter? Or is it better to get that face to face? What about good news? What if someone has something really great to tell you? Would you rather hear that face to face? Would you rather hear that via email? How does the message change the way that it's expressed? Those are all things that we can consider when we're talking about communication. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me or post them in the forum. And that covers the basis of Chapter 1. Please make sure that you post your reflections so that I know that you're involved in the class and that you're participating. And I look forward to seeing you next week.